I still remember the exact moment when I realized my family saw me as nothing more than a convenience. The realization didn't hit me like a sudden thunderclap. It crept in slowly, like the numbness spreading through my body as the pain medication wore off. I was propped up in my hospital bed, smartphone trembling in my hand, staring at a social media post that my own husband had forgotten I could see. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Paradise Found, our family vacation. No responsibilities. The photo showed Robert beaming on a white sand beach, his arm around our daughter Emma, with Tyler making a goofy face beside them. My mother-in-law Diana stood regally at the edge of the frame, her designer sunglasses perched perfectly on her nose despite the Hawaiian breeze. They looked happy. Happier than they'd seemed in months, happier than they ever looked around me. And there I was, 3 days post-spinal fusion surgery, alone in a hospital room with nothing but the steady beep of monitors and the occasional visit from an overworked nurse to keep me company. The vacation we'd planned together for a year, the one I'd paid for with my marketing agency's success, the one that was supposed to be postponed after my emergency surgery. Except it wasn't postponed. They just went without me. That's when I knew. 22 years of marriage, 2 children I'd raised while building a business, and a lifetime of accommodating my husband's family had earned me nothing. I was disposable. And that's when I decided to change my estate plan. My name is Olivia Taylor, though most people call me Liv. At 48, I'd built Horizon Marketing into one of Portland's most sought-after boutique agencies. I'd married my college sweetheart Robert, had 2 beautiful children, and purchased our dream craftsman home in the West Hills. From the outside, we had it all: the picture-perfect family, successful careers, and the respect of our community. The pain had started subtly, a dull ache in my lower back that I attributed to long hours at my desk. By the time I finally saw a specialist, the diagnosis was severe, a degenerative disc disease that required immediate surgery. The doctor had been blunt: postpone it any longer, and I risked permanent nerve damage. "What about our Hawaii trip? Next week?" Robert had asked the surgeon, not me. His tone carried more annoyance than concern. Dr. Bennett hadn't sugarcoated it. "Mrs. Taylor will need at least 6 weeks of recovery before any travel is advisable. Even then, a long flight and beach activities would be challenging." I'd seen the flicker of disappointment cross Robert's face, quickly masked with what I now recognize as performative concern. "We'll reschedule, of course," he'd said, squeezing my hand just a bit too tightly. "Family comes first." Diana, my mother-in-law, had sighed dramatically from her corner of the consultation room. She'd insisted on coming along, claiming her friend's son was a spine specialist, and she wanted to make sure Olivia gets proper care. In reality, Diana had never approved of me, the middle-class girl who'd trapped her son with pregnancy in our final year of college. Never mind that we'd been engaged already, or that I'd built my business from nothing while Robert relied on family connections for his financial advisory practice. "Such terrible timing," Diana had murmured, scrolling through her phone. "The resort is fully booked for the next year. Non-refundable, too." The surgery had been scheduled for the following day. Emergency cases get priority, and my doctor hadn't wanted to wait. Robert had dropped me off at the hospital at 5 a.m., kissing my forehead distantly before checking his watch. "I've got that breakfast meeting with the Peterson account. Tyler will come by after class, and Emma can stop in after cheer practice." Neither of my children had shown up that day. Tyler had texted about a killer exam he needed to study for, while Emma sent a string of sad face emojis with, "Coach won't let me skip." I'd told myself it was fine. They were kids with their own lives. The surgery had gone well, technically speaking, though the pain afterward was worse than I'd anticipated. Robert had appeared briefly that evening, staying just long enough to ask if I needed anything before mentioning he had mountains of paperwork to finish. He'd seemed distracted, checking his phone repeatedly. "Diana's upset about Hawaii," he'd said, almost accusingly. "She's been looking forward to this trip for months." I'd been too groggy to argue. "I'm sorry my spinal condition has inconvenienced everyone," I'd mumbled. He hadn't caught the sarcasm. "We'll figure something out," he'd replied, patting my hand before leaving. The next day had brought more of the same: brief visits, distracted conversations, and the growing sense that my family was impatient with my recovery. On the third day post-surgery, a young nurse named Jade had helped me shuffle painfully to the bathroom. "No family today?" she'd asked, her voice carefully neutral. "They're busy," I'd replied automatically, the excuse so familiar it required no thought. Jade had made a non-committal sound, helping me back to bed. "My mother had this same surgery last year. My sisters and I worked in shifts, so she was never alone." The comment hadn't been judgmental, but it had lodged in my chest like a splinter. When was the last time my family had inconvenienced themselves for me? I couldn't remember. Later that afternoon, I'd open my laptop to catch up on work emails. Even flat on my back, I couldn't let my clients down, when a notification had popped up. Robert had tagged me in a post. Expecting perhaps a hospital update or well wishes, I'd clicked, and there they were, on our family vacation, without me. The caption had been especially cutting. "Sometimes you need to seize the moment. Life's too short to put happiness on hold." I'd stared at those words until they blurred, my finger hovering over the screen. The post had already gathered dozens of sympathetic comments. "So glad you didn't let Olivia's situation ruin the family trip." "Diana looks amazing as always. That resort was the perfect choice." "You deserve this break, handling everything so well with Liv's health issues." My sister Eliza had called me minutes after the post appeared, her voice tight with controlled rage. "Please tell me I'm misunderstanding this, Liv. Tell me they didn't actually go on vacation while you're still in the hospital." I couldn't speak. "That's it," Eliza had continued. "I'm booking a flight from Boston right now. This is beyond unacceptable." "Don't," I'd managed finally. "I don't want anyone coming out of obligation." "Obligation? You're my sister. Unlike some people, I actually love you." Her words had broken something loose in me. Love. Such a simple concept, yet suddenly I was questioning whether my husband actually loved me, whether my children did, whether anyone in the Mitchell family had ever seen me as more than Robert's unfortunate choice, to be tolerated but never embraced. "Eliza," I'd said suddenly, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "Do you still use Marcus Chen as your attorney when you're in Portland?" "Marcus? Yes, he handled my divorce last year. Why?" "I need his number." "Liv, what are you thinking?" I'd looked again at the photo of my family, so jubilant in my absence. "I'm thinking it's time I protect myself." The call to Marcus had been brief. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He'd remembered me from Eliza's wedding years ago and agreed to visit me in the hospital the following morning. I'd slept surprisingly well that night, as if making one decision for myself had unlocked some reservoir of peace. Marcus had arrived, bearing flowers and a genuine smile, settling into the visitor's chair with none of the awkward discomfort my family had displayed. "Eliza filled me in on the basics," he'd said, opening his leather portfolio. "But I'd like to hear from you what you're looking for." I'd taken a deep breath. "I want to change my estate plan, and I need to understand exactly what assets are truly mine." Marcus's expression had remained professionally neutral, but his eyes had sharpened. "When did you last update your estate documents?" "When the kids were born," I'd admitted. "Everything goes to Robert and then to the children. Standard stuff." "And your business? Horizon Marketing?" "It's incorporated separately, but Robert is listed as my successor." The words had tasted bitter as I'd spoken them. Marcus had nodded, making notes. What prompted this review? Besides your surgery. I'd shown him the social media post. His lips had thinned slightly, the only indication of disapproval from the composed attorney. I see. He'd set down his pen. Olivia, I need to ask you something directly. Are you considering divorce? The question should have shocked me, should have made me defensive. Instead, I'd felt a strange calm. I don't know yet, I'd answered, honestly. But I know I need to protect what I've built, regardless of what comes next. Marcus had spent the next hour walking me through my options, explaining how my business could be protected, how assets could be reallocated, how trusts could be established for the children that wouldn't give Robert control. What about the land? I'd asked finally. Your grandmother's property in Cannon Beach? I'd nodded. The oceanfront acres had been in my family for generations, worth millions now, but priceless to me for the memories it held. I'd maintained it through my own earnings, paying the taxes and upkeep from my business accounts. Diana had been pushing for years to develop it, to stop wasting prime real estate, as she put it. That's solely in your name, correct? Yes, but Robert's always acted as though it's a family asset. Last year, he and Diana consulted architects about building vacation homes there. Marcus's eyebrows had raised slightly. Without your permission? They presented it as a surprise, a favor they were doing for me. He'd made another note. We'll ensure that remains protected. In fact, I recommend placing it in a separate trust immediately. By the end of our meeting, I'd signed preliminary paperwork to protect my most valuable assets and scheduled a follow-up for when I was discharged. For the first time since seeing that Hawaiian photo, I'd felt a flicker of strength returning. One more thing, Marcus had said, packing up his briefcase. I recommend you don't mention these changes to Robert until everything is finalized. Estate modifications can sometimes trigger unpredictable responses. I'd nodded, understanding the unspoken warning. He's in Hawaii anyway. By the time they return, it'll be done. As Marcus had turned to leave, my phone had chimed with a text from Robert. Diana's having the time of her life. Maybe we should extend a few days since we're already here. Doctor said you'll be discharged to home care tomorrow anyway. I'd shown it to Marcus, whose professional demeanor had cracked, just enough to reveal a flash of disgust. I'll expedite everything, he'd promised. After he'd left, I'd sat with my phone in hand, reading Robert's message again. The old Olivia would have responded with understanding, even apology for ruining their original plans. The old Olivia would have assured him that yes, of course they should extend their trip. Don't worry about me. Instead, I'd set the phone down without replying and pressed the call button for the nurse. Everything okay, Mrs. Taylor? Jade had asked, appearing in the doorway. Actually, I've been thinking about what you said, about your mother's recovery. Do you know any good home health services? It seems I'll need to arrange my own care. Jade's expression had softened with understanding. I have several recommendations and, she'd hesitated before continuing. My shifts end at 7 p.m. this week. If you need someone to check in evenings? The kindness of this near stranger had brought tears to my eyes, the first I'd allowed myself since seeing the vacation photos. Thank you, I'd whispered. What I didn't tell Jade, what I hadn't even fully admitted to myself yet, was that I wasn't just changing my estate plan. I was changing my entire life. Because sometimes it takes being left behind to realize you need to move forward on your own. As I'd settled back against the hospital pillows, I'd picked up my phone one more time. But instead of replying to Robert, I'd opened my photo album and found an image of my grandmother's coastal property. Wild, beautiful, and untamed by development. I'd spent childhood summers there, and in recent years had found myself dreaming of retiring to its peaceful shores. This is mine, I'd whispered to myself, and no one is taking it from me again. That night, I'd slept soundly for the first time since my surgery, dreamless and deep. When I woke, it was with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but at least now I was walking it with my eyes open. And the first step was reclaiming what was rightfully mine. The following morning had brought discharge paperwork and final instructions from Dr. Bennett. She'd frowned when I explained my family was still in Hawaii. "You'll need significant assistance. For at least the first 2 weeks. Are you sure you have adequate support at home?" "I've arranged for professional care," I'd assured her, "and my sister is flying in tomorrow." The doctor hadn't seemed entirely convinced, but had signed the discharge papers anyway. "Call immediately if you experience increased pain or any new symptoms. Spinal fusion isn't something to take lightly." I'd been halfway through changing into the clothes Eliza had dropped off when my phone had rung. Diana's name had flashed on the screen, the first contact from any family member that day. I'd hesitated before answering. "Hello, Diana." "Olivia." "Darling." Her voice had dripped with artificial sweetness. "How are you feeling?" "Better, I hope." "I'm being discharged today." "Wonderful news. I knew you'd bounce back quickly. You've always been so sturdy." Coming from Diana, this wasn't a compliment. Nothing about me had ever been delicate or refined enough for her standards. "Was there something you needed?" I'd asked, unwilling to endure her backhanded comments. "Well, since you're on the mend, I've been thinking about your grandmother's property. Robert mentioned you might be selling it soon?" My hand had tightened on the phone. "I never said that." "Oh?" Her tone had remained light, but I'd caught the edge beneath it. "He seemed quite certain. We've been talking with the Prestons. You remember James Preston from the club? His development company would give us a very fair price, considering it's all family." "There is no us when it comes to that land, Diana," I'd replied, surprising myself with my firmness. "It belongs solely to me, and I have no intention of selling." A brief silence had followed, then Diana's voice had returned, noticeably cooler. "I see your surgery hasn't improved your attitude. We'll discuss this when we return. Robert has some very sensible plans drawn up already." Before I could respond, she'd ended the call. I'd stared at the phone, adrenaline coursing through me. So that's what they'd been doing in Hawaii, not just vacationing without me, but plotting to sell my family's land. My land. The property that represented the only piece of my pre-Robert identity I'd managed to maintain. With shaking hands, I'd texted Marcus. "Need to meet today after discharge. They're planning to sell my grandmother's property." His response had been immediate. "Coming to hospital now. Don't sign anything." 90 minutes later, I'd been settled in a private car Marcus had arranged, heading not to my family home, but to a small hotel near his office. The decision had been impulsive but necessary. I'd needed neutral ground to think clearly. The property transfer to the trust will be complete by tomorrow, Marcus had assured me as he'd helped me check in. "I've also frozen the business succession plan. No one can touch Horizon without your explicit consent now." I'd thanked him then, asked the question that had been burning in my mind since Diana's call. Could Robert actually have sold my land without my knowledge? Marcus had chosen his words carefully. "Not legally, no, but there have been cases where spouses forged signatures or applied pressure that resulted in coerced sales. The fact that he's discussing it as a foregone conclusion is concerning." "He always treated my grandmother's land as an inconvenience," I'd admitted. "Something taking up space in our portfolio that should be properly monetized." "Well, it's secure now," Marcus had promised. "I should warn you, though, Robert will receive automatic notification of the trust establishment as your spouse. Legally, we're required to inform him." I'd nodded, understanding what this meant. The confrontation was inevitable, but at least now I'd be facing it from a position of strength. After Marcus had left, I'd carefully lowered myself onto the hotel bed, mindful of my still healing incision. The pain medication was wearing off, but I'd welcomed the clarity that came with the discomfort. For too long, I'd been numbing myself to the reality of my marriage. My phone had buzzed with a text from Tyler, my first contact from either child since the surgery. "Hey Mom, how are you feeling? Hawaii is awesome, but miss you." The message had come 5 days after my operation, 5 days during which my son had apparently not missed me enough to call once. I hadn't responded immediately, unsure what to say to this child who seemed like a stranger. Instead, I'd opened my laptop and logged into my business email. 3 major clients had been reaching out, concerned about project timelines in my absence. My team had handled things admirably, but certain decisions needed my input. Work, at least, was something I understood, something that valued my contribution. I'd spent the next hour sending emails and making careful plans. By the time I'd finished, a new message had appeared from Robert. "Diana says you're being difficult about the beach property. We'll talk when we get back. Try to be reasonable for once." And there it was, the real Robert, not the charming financial advisor who impressed clients or the devoted family man he portrayed on social media. This was the man who'd been gradually erasing me for years, diminishing my opinions, treating my success as secondary to his family's legacy. For the first time, I'd seen our entire relationship with perfect clarity. How I'd been molded into the supporting character in my own life story. How I'd allowed my identity to be subsumed by the Mitchell family narrative. How even my grandmother's precious gift had been reframed as a Mitchell asset to be disposed of when convenient. I'd picked up my phone then, not to respond to Robert or Tyler, but to call the one person who had always seen me clearly. "Eliza, I need a favor." My sister's voice had been immediately concerned. "Anything, Liv. Are you okay?" "I've checked. Into a hotel instead of going home. I need you to pick up some things from the house when you arrive tomorrow." "A hotel?" "Liv, what's happening?" I'd taken a deep breath. "I'm reclaiming my life, and I need to start by reclaiming my space." There had been a moment of silence before Eliza had responded, her voice filled with what I now recognized as long-withheld relief. "It's about damn time." Eliza arrived at the hotel the following afternoon, wheeling in my largest suitcase and carrying a tote bag filled with toiletries. Her face was flushed with what I recognized as her righteous anger, the same expression she'd worn when defending me from neighborhood bullies 30 years earlier. "Your house is ridiculous," she announced, carefully setting the tote bag on the desk. "It's like a museum where no one actually lives." I smiled weakly from my position on the bed, where I'd spent most of the day alternating between medication-induced sleep and working on my laptop. Diana decorated it. "Befitting a Mitchell," she always said. Eliza snorted. "Well, Mitchell taste is apparently devoid of comfort or personality." She began unpacking my clothes, hanging them carefully in the closet. I grabbed the essentials, plus your grandmother's photo albums from your office safe. My chest tightened with gratitude. "You remembered." "Of course I remembered. Those albums are the only time I see you actually smile in family photos." She paused, turning to face me with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Liv, was it always this bad, or did I just not see it?" The question hung between us. 22 years of holidays where Eliza had witnessed snippets of my married life, carefully, curated visits where I'd maintained the facade of contentment. "It wasn't always bad," I said finally, the admission feeling like both a betrayal and a relief. "Robert was different before Diana moved in with us, after his father died. Or maybe I was different, more willing to compromise, to bend, to break," Eliza corrected gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You don't laugh anymore, Liv. You don't paint. You don't play the piano. All the things that made you you before Robert. I hadn't realized she'd noticed. I barely had. I built a successful business, I countered. Yes, and I'm incredibly proud of you for that. But Horizon became the only place you existed as yourself. Her words struck with uncomfortable precision. My marketing agency had been my refuge, the one domain where I made decisions without Robert's input or Diana's criticism. I'd poured everything into it, perhaps because it was the only part of my life that felt truly mine. When did you get so insightful? I asked, deflecting with weak humor. Eliza smiled. Probably around the same time I stopped letting Carl make me feel worthless. Her ex-husband had been charming, successful, and emotionally abusive, a pattern I'd recognized but never commented on, aware of my own glass house. A notification chimed on my phone, another text from Robert. Extending until Saturday now. Emma's having such a great time with her cousins. I showed it to Eliza, who read it with narrowed eyes. Still no questions about how you're recovering from major surgery. She wasn't asking. They've been consistently thoughtful, I replied, the sarcasm sharper than intended. Eliza hesitated, then pulled an envelope from her purse. There's something else you should know. When I was getting your things, I found this in Robert's desk. I took the envelope, confused by her solemn expression. Inside was a letter from Preston Development Group, dated 3 weeks before my surgery. It outlined preliminary terms for the purchase of the Taylor coastal property, pending final agreement. Robert's signature was at the bottom, next to a blank line labeled Olivia Taylor. The room seemed to tilt. He already agreed to sell. The second page is worse, Eliza said quietly. I flipped to it and found a personal note from James Preston. Robert, have your attorneys confirm if Olivia's medical power of attorney would suffice for the property transfer. Given her upcoming medical issues, this might be the cleanest approach. The implication hit me like physical blow. He was planning to use my surgery to sell my grandmother's land. The words felt unreal, spoken in a voice I barely recognized as my own. He was going to use my incapacitation to take what's mine. Eliza's hand found mine, squeezing gently. I made copies before putting it back exactly where I found it. Marcus should see this immediately. I nodded, still processing the enormity of the betrayal. Robert hadn't just abandoned me during my recovery. He'd seen my surgery as an opportunity to finally get his hands on the one asset he'd never been able to control. Do you think the surgery was even necessary? The question escaped before I could censor it, the darkest fear that had been forming at the edges of my consciousness. Eliza's eyes widened. Surely he wouldn't— No, I interrupted. Reality, reasserting itself. Dr. Bennett is the best spinal surgeon in Portland. She'd never participate in something like that. The surgery was legitimate. I took a steadying breath. But the timing. Robert may have seen it as perfect for his plans. I reached for my phone, texting Marcus. New development. Need to meet ASAP. His response was immediate. On my way. While we waited, Eliza helped me to the bathroom, then carefully washed my face and brushed my hair. These simple acts of care, the kind I'd provided for others but rarely received, broke something open inside me. I found myself weeping, silent tears tracking down my freshly washed cheeks. I've been so stupid, I whispered. Stop that, Eliza said firmly. You're not stupid. You've been systematically manipulated by people who were supposed to love you. There's a difference. When Marcus arrived 40 minutes later, I'd composed myself enough to relay the new information with detached precision. His normally calm demeanor gave way to tightly controlled anger as he examined the documents. This crosses several legal and ethical lines, he said finally. Using a medical power of attorney for financial transactions outside immediate healthcare needs is explicitly forbidden. Would it have worked? I asked. No, he said definitively. But the attempt itself is troubling. What does this mean? For our current plan? Marcus straightened the papers with methodical precision. It means we accelerate everything. I'll have the trust documents for your property finalized by morning. I've also prepared paperwork to remove Robert as your medical proxy effective immediately. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. And I strongly recommend we revisit the conversation about divorce. The word hung in the air, heavier now, more concrete. I thought of the beachfront property, of the decades of work I'd poured into my agency, of the home I'd been gradually erased from. And beneath it all, the fundamental betrayal, a husband who saw my vulnerability as an opportunity for exploitation. What would that look like? I asked, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. Marcus outlined the process clinically: division of assets, negotiation periods, potential custody arrangements for Emma, who was still a minor. The practicalities washed over me in a wave of details that would have been overwhelming if not for the clarity fueling my resolve. I need time to think, I said finally. But in the meantime, protect everything. Consider it done, Marcus assured me, packing up his briefcase. Try to rest. Tomorrow will be a busy day. After he left, Eliza ordered room service and insisted. I ate something substantial. The simple soup and half sandwich were the first real food I'd managed since the surgery, and I was surprised to find my appetite returning along with my determination. What can I do? Eliza asked as she cleared away the dishes. I considered the question carefully. I need to see the beach property. Not now, obviously, but when I'm stronger. I need to stand on that land and remind myself why I fought to keep it all these years. Consider it planned, she promised. I'll rent a car with good suspension for the drive. That night, as Eliza slept on the pull-out sofa, I found myself scrolling through years of family photos on my phone. There we were at Tyler's high school graduation, Emma's dance recitals, holiday gatherings at Diana's insistence. In each image, I noted my gradual recession to the background, how I'd gone from central figure to peripheral observer in my own family narrative. The pattern was painfully obvious now. In the early years, Robert and I had stood close, his arm around my waist, my head on his shoulder. As time passed, the physical distance between us in photos grew, with Diana often positioning herself between us. My expressions had shifted too, from genuine joy to practiced smiles that never quite reached my eyes. The most recent family photo had been taken at Christmas, just 4 months earlier. I could barely recognize myself, a thin woman with carefully maintained brown hair and an expression of resigned pleasantness. I'd been wearing a sweater Diana had selected, standing slightly behind Robert, whose hand rested possessively on Emma's shoulder. Tyler stood on his father's other side, mirroring his stance with uncanny precision. I looked like an afterthought in my own family portrait. A new text from Emma interrupted my reflections. "Miss you, Mom. Grandma got me the cutest sundress." Attached was a selfie of my daughter in a designer piece that probably cost more than my hospital copay. Diana stood in the background, looking smug. I stared at the image, noticing for the first time how much Emma had begun to mirror Diana's mannerisms. The tilted chin, the practiced smile. My vibrant, creative child was being remolded in her grandmother's image, just as Robert had been shaped by his domineering mother. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider whether my children might be better off with less of Diana's influence, not more. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. I'd stayed in an increasingly hollow marriage partly to maintain family stability, but what if that stability was actually harming them? I set the phone aside without responding to Emma's text. Tomorrow would bring decisions I'd never thought I'd face. For now, I needed rest. Morning arrived with a flurry of legal activity. Marcus sent a courier with documents requiring my signature, trust papers for the coastal property, medical proxy changes, and preliminary divorce filing papers, which he stressed I didn't need to sign yet, but should review. As I carefully initialed each page of the property trust, I felt a weight lifting. This land, the wild stretch of Oregon coastline where I'd spent childhood summers collecting shells and watching storms roll in, would remain protected. No matter what happened next, this piece of my heritage was secure. With the most urgent protections in place, I turned my attention to my business. A video call with my executive team revealed that while they'd managed admirably in my absence, several major clients were anxious about my extended leave. They're asking for personal reassurance that you're still overseeing their accounts, explained Denise, my creative director and longest-standing employee. Her concern was evident even through the screen. Are you allowed to do that while recovering? The hesitation in her question told me she'd picked up on something beyond normal client management issues. What else is happening, Denise? She exchanged glances with Jason, our operations director. Robert called the office yesterday. He said you'd be out indefinitely and that he'd be stepping in as interim CEO per your succession plan. Ice flooded my veins. And what did you tell him? That any changes in leadership would require board approval and written documentation. From you. Jason's voice was carefully neutral. He seemed surprised by that response. He said we were being obstructionist, Denise added. That you were heavily medicated and not thinking clearly. The calculated nature of Robert's move sickened me. He'd waited until I was vulnerable, family isolated, and presumably incapacitated by medication to make his play, not just for my grandmother's land, but for my company as well. I want to come to the office, I declared, suddenly certain this was necessary. Tomorrow morning, just for a few hours to reassure the team and our key clients. Are you sure that's wise? Jason asked. Your health is precisely why I need to be seen, I finished firmly. I won't let anyone use my temporary physical limitation to undermine what we've built. After the call ended, I asked Eliza to help me dress in something other than pajamas for the first time since surgery. The simple act of putting on a casual dress and combing my hair made me feel more human, more like myself. You're looking stronger already? Eliza observed, helping me to a chair by the window. Anger is apparently quite energizing, I replied, only half joking. Righteous fury, she corrected. It's a perfectly appropriate response to betrayal. Mid-afternoon brought another development, a call from Tyler, his voice unusually subdued. Mom? Are you okay? Dad said you checked into a hotel instead of coming home. So Robert had returned to Portland. Interesting that he'd gone home rather than coming to find me. I'm recovering well, I said carefully. Your Aunt Eliza is helping me. Why aren't you at home? Dad seems really worried. I doubted that. Very much. It was easier to have professional care here. Not entirely a lie. The hotel had arranged for a visiting nurse to check my incision and vital signs daily. Tyler was silent for a moment. Is something going on with you and Dad? He's been acting weird, and Grandma keeps saying you're being difficult about some property thing. I closed my eyes, choosing my words with care. My son was 20, legally, an adult, but still very much finding his way. He'd always been closer to his father, emulating Robert's careful ambition and social polish. I didn't want to drag him into the middle of what was coming. Tyler, your father and I have some business matters to resolve. It's nothing for you to worry about. But how's your summer internship going? I intentionally changed the subject. Are you enjoying the finance department? He hesitated, then followed my lead. It's okay. Kind of boring, honestly. This was new. Tyler had never before expressed anything but enthusiasm for following in his father's financial footsteps. Boring how? Just spreadsheets and meetings, not like what you do. His voice lowered slightly. I've been thinking maybe marketing would be more interesting. My heart squeezed. For years, Tyler had dismissed my career as just advertising, echoing Diana's diminishment of my work. This small admission felt monumental. Marketing has its share of spreadsheets too, I said lightly, but there's certainly more creativity involved. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Anyway, when are you coming home? Emma's being extra annoying without you there. The familiar sibling complaint almost made me smile. I'm not sure yet. My recovery is going well, but I need to take it slowly. After we hung up, I sat staring at the phone. There was so much. I hadn't said that home might not be our craftsman house anymore, that his father had tried to appropriate my business in my absence, that his grandmother had been systematically undermining me for decades. Those conversations would come, but not yet. First, I needed to secure my position. The lobby of Horizon Marketing had never felt more welcoming than when I carefully made my way through its glass doors the following morning. Eliza had helped me dress in one of my signature pantsuits, modified with flat shoes instead of my usual heels, concession to my still tender spine, and arranged my hair in its professional style. Denise met me at the entrance, her expression shifting from concern to relief. You look good, all things considered. I feel better than I look, I assured her, which wasn't entirely true. The car ride had been uncomfortable despite medication, and standing upright required more concentration than I cared to admit. But being here, in the company I'd built, from a single-room operation to a thriving agency employing 37 people, gave me strength nothing else could. The team had gathered in the main conference room, applauding as I carefully made my way to my seat at the head of the table. I noted with satisfaction that Robert's usual visitor's chair at the side remained conspicuously empty. Thank you all for managing so capably during my absence, I began, my voice steadier than I'd feared it might be. As you can see, I'm recovering well, though I'll continue working limited hours for a few more weeks. We heard rumors, began Tara from the account team, then stopped, clearly uncomfortable. About my husband temporarily taking over? I finished for her. Those rumors were incorrect, while I appreciate Robert's concern. For my business, Horizon continues under my direction, with our established leadership team handling day-to-day operations. The relief in the room was palpable. Now, I continued, let's discuss the Peterson campaign launch and the Westridge proposal. For the next hour, I was simply the CEO they'd always known, focused, decisive, strategic. The familiar rhythm of client discussions and creative problem-solving felt like coming home in a way my actual house hadn't in years. As the meeting concluded, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Robert just left my office. He knows about the trust and proxy changes. Proceeding with caution advised. I showed the message to Eliza, who had waited in my private office during the meeting. He'll be coming here next, she predicted. I'm counting on it, I replied, surprising myself with the anticipation I felt. For once, I wanted a confrontation with Robert, here, on my territory, surrounded by people who respected me. I didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes later, as I was reviewing campaign mock-ups with the creative team, our receptionist's voice came through the intercom. Mrs. Taylor? Your husband is here. He says it's urgent. I exchanged glances with Eliza, who had positioned herself in the corner of my office like a sentinel. Send him in, please. Robert strode through the door seconds later, his normally perfectly groomed appearance slightly disheveled. He wore the expression I'd come to recognize as his crisis. Management face, stern but controlled, ready to take charge of a situation spiraling beyond his grasp. That expression faltered when he saw me seated behind my desk, dressed professionally, clearly in command despite the small pillow supporting my lower back. Olivia, he managed, his voice betraying his surprise. You should be at home resting. I'm exactly where I need to be, I replied evenly. His gaze slid to Eliza, hardening with recognition. I might have known you'd be involved in this, whatever this is. My sister smiled sweetly. Funny. I was about to say the same thing about your mother. Robert's jaw tightened. He turned back to me, visibly composing himself. Can we speak privately? Eliza stays, I said firmly. She's helping with my recovery. He moved closer to my desk, lowering his voice despite my clear intention to keep Eliza present. What the hell are you doing, Liv? Changing proxies, setting up trusts. Marcus? Chen? Really? Your sister's divorce attorney? I'm protecting what's mine, I said simply. We're married. Everything is ours. Including my grandmother's property, the one you already signed preliminary sales documents for without my knowledge or consent. He flinched, confirmation enough that Eliza had found exactly what she thought she had. That was just exploratory, nothing binding. It had your signature, Robert, next to a blank line with my name and a helpful suggestion about using my medical condition to facilitate the sale. You're twisting this, he insisted, but his eyes darted away, the tell he'd had since college when caught in a lie. James, Preston simply offered options. I would never have proceeded without your agreement. Like you wouldn't have stepped in as interim CEO of my company without my agreement? I kept my voice deceptively calm. Because my team tells me you tried to do exactly that while I was still in the hospital. Robert's face flushed. You were heavily medicated. Someone needed to make decisions. And naturally, that someone should be you? Not my executive team, who run this company with me every day. Not the succession plan I've had in place for years that specifically names Denise as acting CEO in my absence. He straightened, shifting tactics. I was worried about you. About us. You're not thinking clearly. Checking into a hotel instead of coming home, freezing financial accounts, excluding me from medical decisions. When's my follow-up appointment with Dr. Bennett? I interrupted. He blinked. What? My post-surgical follow-up. When is it scheduled? I'd have to check my calendar. It's next Tuesday at 10 a.m., I said flatly. Which you would know if you'd been involved in my medical care at all. You'd also know that I'm supposed to avoid stairs for 2 more weeks, which would make staying in our 3-story house rather challenging. Robert's expression darkened. So this is punishment for the Hawaii trip? That's incredibly petty, Liv. The kids needed that vacation, and the resort wouldn't refund our deposit. The audacity stunned me momentarily. Your family vacation while I was hospitalized from major surgery is not why I'm protecting my assets, I said finally. Though it certainly clarified where I stand in your priorities. This is ridiculous. You're my wife. I've supported you. For decades. No, Robert, I cut him off, something breaking free inside me. I've supported you. Financially, emotionally, professionally. I built this company while raising our children. I maintained the home your mother decorated. I smiled through her insults and your neglect. I created the life you've been taking credit for. He stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Perhaps he was. The woman he'd married, young, accommodating, eager to please, had finally had enough. I don't know what's gotten into you, he said stiffly. But this ends now. Come home, stop this legal nonsense, and we can discuss the property situation like rational adults. I smiled. Not the placating expression I'd perfected over years of marriage, but something genuine and slightly dangerous. No. Excuse? Me? No, Robert. I'm not coming home. I'm not stopping the legal nonsense. And there is no property situation to discuss. My grandmother's land is now in an irrevocable trust that neither you nor Diana can touch. His face contorted with a flash of naked rage, an expression I'd seen directed at others, but never at me. It should have frightened me. Instead, it felt like confirmation. You'll regret this, he said, voice low. You think you've built something here? Without the Mitchell name behind you, without my connections? You'd still be designing brochures for local restaurants. Eliza stirred in her corner, but I raised a hand slightly, stopping whatever retort she'd been about to deliver. This moment was mine. "Robert," I said calmly, "do you know who our top 5 clients are?" He frowned at the apparent non sequitur. "Of course. Westridge Development, Peterson Hotels, Alliance Insurance. And how many of them came through your connections? That's not the point. The Mitchell reputation." "One," I interrupted. "Alliance Insurance, 7 years ago. The rest I secured independently through the quality of our work and my professional reputation." I leaned forward slightly, ignoring the twinge in my back. "Your name isn't on a single contract, Robert. And after your attempt to commandeer my company during my surgery, it never will be." The color drained from his face. "You need to think very carefully about your next move, Olivia. Diana is already upset about your behavior. If you persist with this rebellion, there will be consequences." The mention of his mother should have intimidated me, as it had countless times before. Instead, I felt a strange, bubbling laughter rising in my chest. "I'm terrified," I said dryly. "What will she do? Exclude me from another family dinner? Redecorate my house without permission again? Buy our daughter inappropriate clothing to undermine my parenting?" "She's only ever tried to elevate this family," Robert snapped, "to give us the standing we deserve. And you've fought her at every turn with your middle-class sensibilities and sentimental attachments to worthless property." And there it was, the fundamental truth of our marriage. I had never been good enough. Not for Diana, not for the Mitchell legacy, and ultimately, not for Robert. "I think we're done here," I said quietly. "I have a business to run." He stared at me for a long moment, as if waiting for me to crumble, to apologize, to return to the compliant wife I'd been for so long. When I remained steadily looking back at him, something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, that the dynamic between us had fundamentally changed. "This isn't over," he said finally, turning to leave. "Actually, Robert," I called, after him, "I think it is." As the door closed behind him, I exhaled slowly, the adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation beginning to ebb. Eliza was at my side immediately. "That was magnificent," she said softly. "Are you okay?" I considered the question carefully. My back ached from sitting upright for so long. The emotional toll of the confrontation had left me drained. And yet, beneath the physical discomfort and mental fatigue, I felt something unfamiliar. Something that might have been pride, or perhaps simply the relief of finally speaking my truth. "I'm better than I've been in years," I answered honestly. That evening, back at the hotel, Marcus called with an update. "Robert contacted his lawyer this afternoon. They're preparing a counter-strategy, likely arguing diminished capacity due to your medication and trying to leverage his role in Horizon's growth." "Let them try," I said, surprising myself with the steely confidence in my voice. "I have 22 years of documentation showing exactly who built my company." "That's good, because this is likely to get messier before it's resolved. Diana Mitchell apparently has considerable influence with several judges in the county." Of course she did. Diana's social networking had always been strategic, creating leverage she could deploy when needed. "What's our next step?" I asked. "Secure your personal belongings from the house, particularly anything with sentimental or financial value. Based on Robert's reaction today, I wouldn't put it past him to use access to your possessions as a pressure point." The thought of Robert holding my personal items hostage wasn't far-fetched. He'd done something similar during our only serious fight years ago, misplacing my grandmother's pearl necklace until I'd apologized for challenging him about a financial decision. "Eliza can go tomorrow," I decided. "I'll make a list of the essentials." After hanging up, I turned to find Eliza watching me with a mixture of pride and concern. "How does it feel?" she asked. Taking back your power? I considered the question carefully. Terrifying, I admitted. Exhilarating, like waking up after a very long sleep. She smiled. I remember that feeling. After Carl, when I finally stopped letting his voice in my head dictate my choices. She hesitated. It gets easier, Liv. I promise. I nodded, wanting to believe her. The path ahead would be difficult. Legally, emotionally, parentally. Robert wouldn't surrender control easily, and Diana would deploy every weapon in her considerable arsenal to protect her son and the Mitchell family image. But for the first time in decades, I was fighting not just for my children or my business, but for myself. And that made all the difference. The first warning sign came in the form of a delivery to my hotel room, a stunning arrangement of white lilies and orchids, Diana's signature flowers. The card, written in her unmistakable calligraphy, read, "Family disagreements should remain private. I raised you better than this, Robert." I stared at the flowers, decoding the layers of message beneath the seemingly innocuous words. This wasn't a peace offering. It was a command performance dressed as maternal concern, with the clear implication that I was embarrassing them by pursuing legal protection of my assets. "Charming," Eliza muttered, reading over my shoulder. "Should we donate these to the pediatric ward?" "No," I said, surprising myself. "Leave them. They're a useful reminder of what I'm dealing with." Over the following days, Diana's strategy became clear. A carefully orchestrated campaign of concern. 3 of her closest friends called, each conversation beginning with effusive sympathy about my surgery, before inevitably drifting to carefully worded questions about my temporary living situation and whether I was getting the psychological support I clearly need. The subtext was crystal clear. Diana was establishing a narrative of my mental instability. "Classic manipulation," Marcus observed when I reported these developments during our meeting at his office. "She's laying groundwork to challenge your decision-making capacity if this goes to court." "She's done this before," I admitted, remembering other family conflicts where Diana had rewritten history through whispered conversations and public displays of concern. "It's how she maintains control of the Mitchell social circle." "Then we counter with evidence of your competence," he replied, sliding a document across the desk. "I've scheduled a full psychological evaluation with Dr. Reyes for tomorrow. She's respected by the court and completely independent." "You think it will come to that? Questioning my mental capacity?" Marcus's expression was grim. "Based on the inquiries Robert's attorney has been making, yes. They're exploring every possible angle to challenge the trust transfer and regain control of your assets." I signed the consent forms for the evaluation, a cold anger settling in my chest. They would try to declare me incompetent, paint me as an emotional, irrational woman overreacting to a simple family vacation. It was the ultimate erasure, the final step in decades of subtle diminishment. "How are the children handling all this?" Marcus asked as he filed the paperwork. "Tyler is confused but keeping his distance. Emma," I hesitated, the pain still fresh. "Emma sent me a text yesterday asking if she could live with her father if we separated. She said Diana promised to redecorate her room and take her to Paris for her graduation trip." Marcus's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "She's 18, Olivia. Old enough to make her own choices, but young enough to be swayed by material incentives. Give her time." I nodded, though the hurt lingered. My daughter had always been susceptible to Diana's influence. The designer clothes, the social connections, the promise of moving through elite circles. I'd tried to balance that with more grounded values, but in the battle for Emma's loyalty, Diana's wealth and Robert's indulgence had powerful appeal. "What about the attempt to seize your company?" Marcus asked, changing the subject. "Any further developments there?" "Not directly, but I've heard rumblings. 2 of our smaller clients suddenly dropped us yesterday. both with connections to the Mitchell family. Predictable, Marcus nodded. They'll try to hurt you financially first, create pressure points to force concessions. He wasn't wrong. By the end of the week, the pattern had become unmistakable. Clients with ties to Robert's financial circles finding sudden reasons to terminate their contracts, suppliers delaying deliveries, even a potential investor abruptly withdrawing from discussions. The message was clear. The Mitchell family had reach, and they weren't afraid to use it. Yet for every lost client, my resolve strengthened. I spent mornings in careful physical therapy, rebuilding my body's strength, and afternoons at the office, reinforcing my company's foundation. Denise and the team rallied remarkably, reaching out to our strongest independent clients with personalized reassurance, accelerating projects to demonstrate our continued excellence. The most unexpected development came 10 days after my confrontation with Robert, when the phone rang at my hotel room shortly after midnight. I fumbled for it, still groggy from sleep and medication. "Hello?" My voice rasped with fatigue. "Mom?" Tyler's voice was hushed, urgent. "I need to talk to you." I sat up carefully, instantly alert. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, but—" He paused, and I could hear him moving, a door closing. "Dad doesn't know I'm calling. Neither does Grandma." My heart tightened. "What's happening, Tyler?" "They're saying things about you. Really bad things. That you're having some kind of breakdown. That the medication is making you paranoid." The words tumbled out in a rush. "Grandma's friend Mrs. Peterson was here for dinner, and they were talking about having you evaluated for competency or something. Dad kept saying how worried he is." The confirmation of Marcus's prediction should have alarmed me, but somehow hearing it spoken aloud was almost a relief. "I see. Mom, what's really going on? Dad says you're trying to cut him out of the business, that you're not thinking clearly because of the pain meds." I weighed my words carefully. Tyler was an adult, but he was also my son, caught between warring parents. "Tyler, I'm not having a breakdown and I'm not paranoid. I'm protecting myself and what I've built." "From Dad? That doesn't make sense. He loves you." The innocent certainty in his voice made my chest ache. "It's complicated, honey. While I was in surgery, Dad tried to sell your great-grandmother's coastal property without my permission. He also attempted to take control of Horizon Marketing." Silence stretched over the line. Then, almost reluctantly, "He said the property sale was your idea, that you discussed it before the surgery." "We never discussed it," I said firmly. "In fact, I've repeatedly refused to sell that land over the years. It's why I placed it in a trust last week, to protect it." "But why would he lie about that?" The genuine confusion in his voice reminded me how successfully Robert had maintained his image as the dedicated family man, the steady provider, the reasonable patriarch. Our children had never seen the dismissive husband who deferred to his mother over his wife, the man who treated my success as secondary to his family name. "People sometimes convince themselves that what they want is what's right," I said carefully. "Your father believes that land should be developed. He may have." Told himself I would eventually agree. Tyler was quiet for another moment. Then, "Emma found some papers in Dad's office about taking control of your company if you were incapacitated." She asked him about it, and he got really angry. My breath caught. "Is Emma okay?" "She's confused. Grandma's been taking her shopping every day, buying her all this stuff, telling her how you're trying to tear the family apart." He paused. "I don't think Emma knows what to believe." "And you?" I asked softly. "What do you believe, Tyler?" He hesitated. "I don't know, but I found something else. In Dad's email." Another pause, longer this time. "He's been talking to James Preston about development plans for the beach property for months. Way before your surgery. There are architectural drawings, investment projections, everything." The confirmation should have hurt, but instead it felt like the final piece of evidence I needed, not for my legal case, but for my own peace of eye. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't misinterpreting. The manipulation had been real, deliberate, and ongoing. "Tyler, can you forward those emails to me?" "I already did," he said quietly. "To your personal account, not your work one. Dad has access to that." Another pause. "Mom, are you and Dad getting divorced?" The directness of the question momentarily took my breath away. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "But things can't continue as they were. I need to stand up for myself." "Because of the property?" His voice sounded small, like the little boy who'd climbed into my lap after nightmares. "Because of what the property represents," I clarified gently. "A pattern of your father and grandmother making decisions about my life without my input or consent. It's been happening for a very long time, Tyler. The property is just where I finally drew the line." After we hung up, I lay awake for hours, processing everything. Tyler's call had been unexpected. A small crack in the united front, I'd assumed. The Mitchell family would present. And Emma finding those documents. Perhaps my daughter wasn't as completely under Diana's spell as I'd feared. The next morning, I forwarded Tyler's emails to Marcus with a simple message: additional evidence of premeditation. His response was immediate. "This is exactly what we needed. Meeting at 2?" By the time I arrived at his office that afternoon, Marcus had already printed out the most damning exchanges, emails dating back 9 months, detailing Robert's plans for my grandmother's property. In one particularly revealing message to James Preston, he'd written, "Once the development is underway, Olivia will see the benefits. Better to ask forgiveness than permission with her sentimental attachments." "This establishes a clear pattern of deception," Marcus noted, organizing the emails into a folder. "Combined with the attempted company takeover and the manipulations, around your medical proxy, we have a compelling case for financial exploitation." "Financial exploitation," I repeated, the legal term lending structure to what I'd experienced emotionally. "Is that grounds for divorce?" Marcus set down his pen, studying me carefully. "Is that the direction you want to take this?" I considered. The question weighing 22 years of marriage against the systematic betrayal I'd uncovered. "I don't see how we come back from this," I admitted finally. "Even if we could, I don't think I want to." He nodded, neither approving nor disapproving, simply acknowledging my decision. "Then yes, this is more than sufficient grounds. Oregon is a no-fault state, but these financial manipulations will be relevant in asset division." I took a deep breath. "Then I'm ready to file." The words seemed to hang in the air between us, the irrevocable step toward dissolving my marriage, redefining my family, reclaiming my autonomy. Marcus slid a document across the desk. The divorce petition. I'd been reviewing for days, waiting for certainty. As I signed my name, I felt a complex emotion that wasn't quite grief or relief, but something between. The acknowledgement of an ending that had been years in the making, the beginning of a future I couldn't yet fully envision. "We'll file this today," Marcus said, his tone gentle but businesslike. "Robert will be served within 48 hours. Are you prepared for his response?" "As much as I can be," I replied, thinking of the carefully crafted text I'd composed to send to my children once Robert had been notified. They deserved to hear the news from me, not filtered through their father's or grandmother's perspective. "Good. Now, about your living situation. The hotel is fine temporarily, but for the divorce proceedings, a more established residence would be beneficial." I nodded, having already considered this. "I'm meeting with a realtor tomorrow. There's a waterfront condo available for lease in the Pearl District." "Perfect. And your medical follow-up?" "Dr. Bennett says I'm healing well. Limited activity for another 2 weeks, then I can begin gradual return to normal routines." I smiled. Slightly. She mentioned that emotional stress can sometimes delay physical recovery, but in my case, It seems to be having the opposite effect. Marcus raised an eyebrow. How so? I'm sleeping better. My pain levels are lower. She thinks it might be because I'm finally addressing the chronic stress I've been living with for years. I shrugged carefully, mindful of my healing spine. Apparently, standing up for yourself can be physically therapeutic. As I left Marcus's office, I felt oddly lighter despite the weight of the decision I'd just formalized. 22 years of marriage was ending, but something else was beginning. A reclamation of self that felt more authentic than anything I'd experienced in decades. The service of divorce papers acted like a match to dry kindling. Within hours of Robert being served, my phone exploded with messages. First from him, demanding I stop this nonsense immediately. Then from Diana, whose carefully cultivated public persona slipped to reveal the fury beneath. You ungrateful, conniving woman. After everything we've done for you. I didn't respond to either, instead sending the prepared messages to my children, explaining my decision in simple, honest terms without vilifying their father. Tyler replied almost immediately with a simple, I understand. Love you, Mom. Emma's response came hours later, a terse, Grandma says you're having a breakdown, followed by silence despite my gentle attempts at further conversation. The next wave came from Diana's social circle, carefully worded messages expressing concern about my fragile state and hasty decisions. I forwarded these to Marcus, adding to our growing file of attempted character assassination. The most vicious salvo came the following day, when I arrived at Horizon to find a potential client waiting. The representative from Westridge Hotels, our largest prospective account, the one that would secure the agency's growth for the next fiscal year. Mrs. Taylor, she greeted me, her expression professionally neutral. I'm afraid I need to inform you that Westridge has decided to go in another direction for our marketing needs. May I ask why? I kept my voice steady, though I suspected I already knew the answer. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. Off. The record? Our CEO received a call from Robert Mitchell yesterday, warning that your company is facing imminent leadership transitions due to personal circumstances. He strongly implied that Horizon wouldn't be stable enough to handle our account. The calculated cruelty of the move was breathtaking. Robert knew exactly how important the Westridge account was to Horizon's expansion plans. This wasn't just financial pressure. It was an attempt to destabilize the foundation of my independence. I see, I said, my mind already calculating damage. Control strategies. I appreciate your honesty. After the representative left, I called an emergency leadership meeting. Denise, Jason, and our senior team gathered in the conference room, their expressions ranging from concern to thinly veiled anger once I explained Robert's interference. He's trying to cripple us, Jason said flatly. But he won't, I countered, a plan already forming. Because we're going to secure the Parker development account instead. Denise looked skeptical. Parker's been with BCG Marketing for a decade. They're not looking to change agencies. They will be, I said, pulling up the industry news on my tablet. Their CMO just announced a complete brand refresh for next quarter. That's our opening. I turned to our strategy director. Sarah, draft a targeted pitch that demonstrates our understanding of their current market challenges. Jason, compile case studies of our most successful rebranding campaigns. Denise, reach out to your contact in their design department. Test the waters. The team dispersed with renewed purpose, but Denise lingered behind. Liv, she said quietly, are you sure you're up for this fight? It's only been 3 weeks since your surgery. I smiled, recognizing the genuine concern beneath her question. I've never been more certain of anything. Robert thinks he can leverage his connections to destroy what I've built. I'm going to show him exactly how wrong he is. That evening, I signed the lease on the Pearl District condo, a sleek, minimalist space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. It couldn't have been more different from the traditional craftsman home Diana had decorated in her historically accurate but stifling style. Here, there were no heavy drapes blocking natural light, no antique furniture chosen for pedigree rather than comfort, no rooms I was discouraged from changing because Mitchell family homes have certain standards, dear. As Eliza helped me arrange the few personal belongings she'd retrieved from the house, my grandmother's photo albums, my collection of first edition novels, the small abstract paintings I'd created in college before marriage consumed my creative energy, I felt myself expanding into the space. My clothing, freed from the confines of the small closet Robert had allocated me in his master suite, hung neatly in the walk-in. My preferred coffee mug sat on the kitchen counter without Diana's disapproving glance. "You should have seen Robert's face when I was packing your things," Eliza commented, arranging my books on the built-in shelves. "He kept saying you'd regret this childish rebellion and come to your senses soon." "And Diana?" I asked, carefully placing my grandmother's hand-painted ceramics on the mantel. Supervising, of course, making sure I didn't take anything of Mitchell family significance. Eliza rolled her eyes, though she did try to slip me a brochure for a wellness retreat that specializes in emotional crises. Very subtle. I laughed, the sound echoing in the open-concept living area. Their playbook is becoming predictable. First concern, then isolation, then questioning my stability. "Don't forget financial pressure," Eliza added. "Tyler mentioned Robert's been moving money between accounts." I nodded, unsurprised. "Marcus anticipated that. We've already secured the key assets and documented the marital finances. Robert can shuffle funds all he wants. The court will trace everything back." That night, settled into my new bed with its view of the city lights, I pulled out my grandmother's journal, the worn leather diary I'd kept close since her death 20 years earlier. Eleanor Taylor had been a woman ahead of her time, a former teacher who'd invested her modest savings in oceanfront property when everyone told her a woman had no business in real estate. Her practical wisdom had guided me through adolescence, though I'd somehow lost sight of it in the slow erosion of my marriage. I turned to a passage I'd read countless times, her firm handwriting bringing her voice back with perfect clarity. "The most expensive thing in this world isn't property or education. It's the cost of letting others define your worth. I paid that price once, never again." My fingers traced her words, understanding them more deeply now than ever before. Eleanor had briefly been engaged to a suitable man from a prominent family, breaking it off when she realized he expected her to surrender her teaching career and independent thoughts along with her maiden name. The scandal had been significant in their small coastal community, but she'd weathered it, eventually marrying my grandfather, a kind, quiet librarian who'd supported her property investments and independent spirit. I'd forgotten that family legacy of quiet strength when I'd married Robert, seduced by his charm and the Mitchell family's seeming sophistication. But Eleanor's blood ran in my veins, her determination to define her own worth now awakening in me. The following morning brought the first legal countermove from Robert's team, an emergency motion challenging my competency to make financial decisions, citing erratic behavior following major surgery and potential medication-induced paranoia. "Exactly as predicted," Marcus said when he called to inform me. "They're requesting a court-appointed evaluator and temporary financial restraining orders." "And our response?" I asked, already dressed for the physical therapy appointment. That was part of my meticulously documented recovery routine. "We submit the independent evaluation from Dr. Reyes, your consistent attendance at work, and the emails from Tyler proving Robert's long-term deception. Judge Watkins is hearing emergency motions today. I've requested we be added to the calendar." 4 hours later, I sat in courtroom 306, straight-backed despite the lingering discomfort of my healing spine. Robert and his attorney occupied the table across the aisle, while Diana sat directly behind them, her expression a study in practiced concern. She'd worn her charity board meeting outfit, conservative, expensive, and designed to convey responsible authority, I couldn't help but notice that Robert had selected the tie I'd given him for our anniversary 2 years earlier. A calculated touch meant to reinforce his image as the devoted husband concerned about his wayward wife. The performance was impressive, in its attention to detail, if nauseating in its manipulation. Judge Watkins, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, reviewed the motions before addressing the court. Mr. Mitchell, you're requesting an emergency competency evaluation for your wife, citing concerns about her medical condition and recent financial decisions. Is that correct? Robert's attorney, a silver-haired man who'd played golf with Diana's late husband, stood. Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Mitchell has been making increasingly erratic decisions following major spinal surgery, including moving out of the family home, restricting her husband's access to joint assets, and making significant changes to her estate planning without proper consultation. We believe these actions may be influenced by her medication regimen and post-surgical stress. I noted the strategic use of Mrs. Mitchell rather than my professional name, a subtle attempt to reinforce Robert's authority. Marcus had warned me about these tactics, how every word choice in court was designed to shape narrative. Judge Watkins turned to our table. Mr. Chen, your response? Marcus rose smoothly. Your Honor, we vigorously oppose this motion as a transparent attempt to regain control over assets Mrs. Taylor has legitimately protected from her husband's unauthorized access. Far from being incompetent, Mrs. Taylor has been actively running her company, attending medical appointments, and making reasoned decisions with full documentation. He presented our evidence methodically. Dr. Reyes's evaluation confirming my mental clarity, my consistent engagement in business operations, and most damaging, the emails between Robert and James Preston revealing the planned sale of my property, without my knowledge. Additionally, Your Honor, Marcus continued, we have documentation that Mr. Mitchell attempted to assume control of Mrs. Taylor's company while she was hospitalized, representing himself as interim CEO without any authorization to do so. Judge Watkins frowned, reviewing the emails carefully. Mr. Mitchell, these communications seem to indicate you were planning to sell property solely owned by your wife without her consent. Is that accurate? Robert's attorney stepped forward. Your Honor, those discussions were purely exploratory. Mr. Mitchell would never have proceeded without his wife's agreement once she was in a condition to provide informed consent. And yet, the judge noted, tapping the papers, this email dated 3 weeks before Mrs. Taylor's surgery specifically mentions using her medical situation as an opportunity to finalize the sale. She looked directly at Robert. That suggests premeditation, not exploration. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes, how to salvage his narrative, how to reframe his actions as concern rather than exploitation. Judge Watkins turned back to me, her gaze direct. Mrs. Taylor, are you currently taking pain medication for your surgical recovery? Yes, Your Honor. A reduced dosage, as prescribed by my surgeon, Dr. Bennett. I have my current medication list and my most recent medical follow-up report available. I handed the documents to Marcus, who presented them to the court. The judge reviewed them briefly. And you're continuing to work during your recovery? On a limited schedule, yes. I attend key meetings and maintain oversight of major decisions, while my executive team handles day-to-day operations, as has always been our protocol during any absence. She nodded, making a note. And your decision to move out of the family home? A practical consideration, Your Honor. Our home has 3 levels with bedrooms on the upper floor. My surgeon advised against navigating stairs during early recovery. The condo I've leased is single-level with elevator access, making it significantly more suitable for my current physical limitations. From the corner of my eye, I saw Diana's face tighten. This rational explanation undercut their narrative of emotional instability, and she knew it. After a few more questions, Judge Watkins set aside her notes and looked between the 2 tables. I see no evidence supporting the need for a competency evaluation. Mrs. Taylor appears to be making rational, documented decisions appropriate to her circumstances. She turned directly to Robert's attorney. Furthermore, I find the timing of this motion concerning, given the evidence suggesting Mr. Mitchell attempted to use his wife's surgery as an opportunity to sell her separately owned property. She denied the motion for competency evaluation and the requested financial restraining orders, instead issuing a temporary order preventing either party from selling or transferring major assets until the divorce proceedings were further along. As we left the courtroom, I caught Diana's cold glare. She leaned close to Robert, whispering something that made his expression harden. This round had gone decisively in my favor, but the Mitchell family wasn't accustomed to losing. Their next move would likely be more aggressive, less concerned with maintaining appearances. "Round one to us," Marcus said quietly as we walked toward the elevator. "But they'll regroup quickly." I nodded, expecting nothing less. At least now there's a court record of Robert's attempted manipulation. That will matter in the divorce proceedings. "Speaking of which," Marcus continued, checking his calendar, "the initial hearing is scheduled for next Friday. We should prepare for Diana to be more directly involved. The Mitchell family reputation is taking hits, and she won't stand for that." Outside the courthouse, I squinted in the bright afternoon sun, drawing a deeper breath than I'd managed in weeks. The legal victory was preliminary, but significant, not just for the practical protections it maintained, but for the public acknowledgement that I wasn't the irrational, unstable woman Robert and Diana had tried to portray. For the first time since seeing that Hawaiian vacation photo, I felt genuinely confident about the path ahead. The Mitchell family had underestimated me for decades, my resilience, my intelligence, my determination. They'd mistaken accommodation for weakness, compromise for submission. They wouldn't make that mistake again. As I stood on the courthouse steps, a text message buzzed through from Tyler. "Heard about court today. Dad's furious. Proud of you, Mom." Those 4 words, "proud of you, Mom," landed with unexpected impact. When was the last time anyone in my family had expressed pride in me? Not for supporting them, not for maintaining the Mitchell image, but for standing my ground as myself. I texted back a simple, "Thank you, sweetheart," before slipping my phone away, blinking back sudden tears. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, I was walking it as the person I was meant to be, not the shadow I'd allowed myself to become. The morning of the initial divorce hearing dawned with an unexpected call from Emma. I hadn't spoken to my daughter directly since filing for divorce. Our communication limited to brief, stilted text exchanges, usually initiated by me. Seeing her name on my phone screen sent my heart racing. "Emma? Sweetheart? Is everything okay?" Her voice was tight, hesitant. "Dad says I have to decide where I want to live after everything is finalized." I closed my eyes, leaning against the kitchen counter of my new condo. Of course, Robert would put that pressure on her, forcing a premature declaration of loyalty. "Emma, you don't have to decide anything right now," I said gently. "The hearing today is just preliminary. Nothing will be finalized for months. But Grandma says I should tell the judge I want to stay with Dad. She says it will look better for the family." My grip tightened on the phone. "Better for the family" had been Diana's code for maintaining appearances throughout my marriage, a phrase that invariably meant suppressing my preferences for the sake of Mitchell family tradition. "Emma, this isn't about what looks better. It's about what you want, what feels right for you." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "You're 18. Legally, you can make your own choice, regardless of what happens with the divorce." She was quiet for a moment. "Dad's really angry, Mom, all the time now. He keeps saying you've lost your mind, that you're trying to destroy everything he's built." The role reversal struck me painfully. My teenage daughter now protecting her father's feelings, managing his emotions as I had for decades. "I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this," I said honestly. "That was never my intention." "Then why are you doing it?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Why couldn't you just come home after your surgery? Why did everything have to change?" The raw hurt in her question deserved a truthful answer, even if it wasn't the simple one she wanted. Because I realized I was disappearing, Emma. Year by year, decision by decision. The person I was meant to be was being erased, and I couldn't let that continue. I took a deep breath. "I know that's hard to understand. Grandma says you're being selfish. Maybe I am finally after 22 years of putting everyone else first." The words came out more sharply than I intended. I softened my tone. "Sweetheart, all I can tell you is that I'm still your mother. I still love you more than anything. And whatever you decide about where you want to live, that won't change." Emma was quiet again, and I could almost see her twisting her hair around her finger, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. "Dad wants me to come to court today," she said finally, "to show support for the family." The Mitchell family, she meant, not me. I swallowed the hurt. "That's your choice, Emma. I won't tell you what to do." After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen, the morning sunlight reflecting off the river outside my windows. The conversation had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. Emma had always been closer to Robert, sharing his social ease, his charm, his ability to move effortlessly through the world of privilege Diana had cultivated around them. But I'd never doubted her love for me, her understanding that I was the parent who showed up consistently, who handled the practical aspects of parenting while Robert enjoyed the fun parts. Now I heard Diana's influence in her words, the subtle reshaping of her perspective to cast me as the villain disrupting Mitchell family harmony. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Hearing at 10, meeting at office at 8:30 to review strategy?" I confirmed quickly, pushing personal hurt aside to focus on the day ahead. The preliminary hearing would establish temporary arrangements for finances and property while the divorce proceeded, critical foundations for the eventual settlement. I needed my sharpest focus, not emotional distraction. By the time I arrived at Marcus's office, dressed in one of my most professional suits, purchased after my surgery, untainted by Mitchell family influence, I had compartmentalized my conversation with Emma. There would be time to address family wounds later. Today was about protecting my future. Marcus greeted me with his usual calm competence, though I noted the extra coffee cups on his desk, a silent acknowledgement that today would require additional fortification. "I've prepared responses to the most likely arguments from Robert's team," he began, sliding a folder across the desk. "They'll focus on his financial contributions to your business, attempting to establish Horizon as a marital asset, despite its separate incorporation." I nodded, reviewing the documents. "They'll also emphasize how the Mitchell name and connections benefited my client roster." Exactly. We counter with documented evidence that only one major client came through those connections, while you independently secured the others through your professional reputation. We reviewed financial statements, property assessments, and potential temporary custody arrangements for Emma, though her age made that largely her choice. Throughout the discussion, I found myself drawing on skills I'd honed in 2 decades of business negotiations, focusing on facts, anticipating opposition arguments, maintaining emotional distance from the process. "You're remarkably composed," Marcus observed as we concluded our preparations. "Most clients find this stage extremely difficult." I considered his observation. I've spent 22 years negotiating with the Mitchell family in one way or another. This is just the first time I'm doing it formally, with proper representation. The courthouse was busier than during the competency hearing, a regular divorce docket day, with multiple cases scheduled in succession. As we walked through security, I spotted Robert and his attorney near the elevators. Diana predictably at his side. What I hadn't expected was Emma standing slightly behind them, wearing the conservative blue dress Diana had purchased for her last birthday, her expression a careful blank. My steps faltered momentarily. Marcus placed a steadying hand at my elbow. "Focus," he murmured. "This is exactly the reaction they want." He was right, of course. Emma's presence was strategic, a visual statement about family loyalty, carefully orchestrated by Diana to unsettle me before the hearing. I straightened my shoulders and continued walking, acknowledging my daughter with a gentle smile as we passed. Emma's eyes met mine briefly, something unreadable flickering across her face before Diana stepped slightly in front of her, breaking our connection with practiced casualness. Courtroom 412 was already half full when we entered, mostly with other families navigating their own legal separations. We took our seats at the plaintiff's table, arranging documents as Robert's party settled across the aisle. I kept my attention, deliberately focused forward, though I was acutely aware of Emma sitting directly behind her father, positioned for maximum visibility to the judge. When Judge Hernandez entered, a middle-aged woman with keen eyes and an efficient manner, the proceedings moved quickly. She established that this was a preliminary hearing to determine temporary arrangements during the divorce process, requested brief opening statements from both attorneys, then moved directly to financial considerations. Robert's attorney, Mr. Bradshaw, presented first, emphasizing Robert's role as the family's primary breadwinner, a creative interpretation that ignored my company's significant income. "While Mrs. Mitchell has maintained employment throughout the marriage," he stated smoothly, "Mr. Mitchell's financial planning practice has been the family's primary support, allowing her the freedom to develop her marketing business without financial pressure." I bit the inside of my cheek, restraining a visible reaction to this revisionist history. Horizon Marketing had matched or exceeded Robert's income for at least 15 years, a fact thoroughly documented in our tax returns. Furthermore, Bradshaw continued, "Mr. Mitchell's family connections provided substantial advantages to Mrs. Mitchell's business development, bringing in key clients that formed the foundation of her agency's success." Marcus made a small notation, awaiting his turn. When Judge Hernandez nodded to him, he rose with measured confidence. "Your Honor, the financial reality of this marriage is substantially different from what Mr. Bradshaw has portrayed," he began, presenting copies of our tax returns for the past decade. "As these documents clearly show, Mrs. Taylor's business has consistently provided equal or greater income to the household. Furthermore, only one of Horizon Marketing's clients came through Mitchell Family Connections, Alliance Insurance, representing less than 8% of the agency's current revenue." He methodically dismantled Bradshaw's narrative, presenting evidence of my independent business success, the property I'd brought into the marriage, including the coastal land, and my consistent financial contributions to our children's education and family expenses. Throughout his presentation, I maintained a composed expression, though I couldn't help noting Robert's growing agitation across the aisle. Diana sat rigid beside him, her perfectly manicured nails tapping silently against her designer handbag, a subtle tell of her displeasure I'd observed countless times during family disagreements. When discussion turned to the coastal property, tensions visibly escalated. "Your Honor," Bradshaw argued, "while this property may have come to Mrs. Mitchell through her family, it has been treated as a family asset throughout the marriage. Mr. Mitchell has paid property taxes, maintained insurance, and managed upkeep costs for over 20 years. Marcus was prepared. "Actually, Your Honor, the financial records tell a different story. Property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs for the coastal property have been paid exclusively from Mrs. Taylor's business accounts since 2005, when she established a separate fund specifically for this purpose." He presented the relevant bank statements. Furthermore, Mr. Mitchell attempted to sell this property without Mrs. Taylor's knowledge or consent while she was hospitalized for spinal surgery. Judge Hernandez frowned, reviewing the documents. Mr. Bradshaw, is there evidence contradicting these financial records? Bradshaw hesitated, clearly unprepared for this level of documentation. Your Honor, regardless of which account paid, these expenses, as a married couple, their finances were fundamentally intertwined. The property has been consistently discussed as a family asset. Discussed by whom? Judge Hernandez asked pointedly. By the family. Mr. Mitchell has emails discussing potential development options dating back several years. Marcus intervened smoothly. Your Honor, those discussions occurred without Mrs. Taylor's participation or consent, as evidenced by the emails we submitted in our filing, where Mr. Mitchell explicitly acknowledges proceeding without his wife's agreement. The judge reviewed the correspondence again, her expression growing increasingly disapproving. I risked a glance at Diana, whose perfect composure had developed a hairline crack, her lips pressed into a thin line, her knuckles white against her handbag. When we moved to the question of temporary living arrangements and expenses, Bradshaw attempted to portray my new condo as an extravagant, impulsive decision. Mrs. Mitchell has leased a luxury waterfront property, Your Honor, significantly increasing living expenses during what should be a period of financial conservation. Marcus countered immediately. Mrs. Taylor's new residence costs less per month than the mortgage and maintenance expenses of the family home, where Mr. Mitchell continues to reside. Furthermore, as previously established, the single-level layout with elevator access was medically necessary for her surgical recovery. By the time we reached the question of Emma, who sat silently throughout the proceedings, Judge Hernandez had developed a visibly skeptical view of Robert's representations. Given that Emma Mitchell is 18 years old, custody is not technically at issue, the judge noted. However, for purposes of support and living arrangements, does she have a preference regarding primary residence? This was the moment Diana had been orchestrating, Emma's opportunity to publicly declare loyalty to the Mitchell side. I kept my expression carefully neutral, though my heart raced as Emma was asked to step forward. My daughter stood, smoothing, her conservative dress, her eyes darting between her father and me. I've been staying with my father since Mom moved out, she began hesitantly. Diana nodded approvingly from her seat. And is that your preference going forward? Judge Hernandez asked gently. Emma swallowed visibly. I'm not sure yet. I'm applying to colleges for next fall, so I'll be moving out soon anyway. She glanced at Diana, whose expression had hardened almost imperceptibly. I guess I'd like to have the option to spend time in both places until then, if that's possible. It wasn't the unequivocal declaration of loyalty Diana had clearly coached her to deliver. From the slight widening of Robert's eyes, it wasn't what he had expected either. I maintained my composure, though relief and a tentative hope bloomed in my chest. Judge Hernandez nodded. That seems reasonable, given your age and circumstances. As Emma returned to her seat, her eyes met mine briefly. I smiled slightly, trying to convey without words that I understood the courage it had taken to express even that small amount of independence. After 2 hours of detailed financial testimony, Judge Hernandez issued her temporary orders. The coastal property would remain in its trust, protected from any sale or development. Financial accounts would remain separate as they currently stood, with Robert continuing to pay the mortgage on the family home while I maintained my condo expenses. Emma was free to divide her time between residences as she chose. A full financial evaluation would be conducted for the final property division, with both businesses subject to independent valuation. As we rose at the conclusion of the hearing, I felt the weight of Diana's gaze. Looking up, I met her eyes directly for perhaps the first time in our 22-year acquaintance. Her expression conveyed a cold fury that might once have intimidated me. Today, I simply nodded slightly before turning away, acknowledgement without submission. Outside the courtroom, Emma lingered awkwardly as Robert conferred with his attorney. When she saw me watching, She took a hesitant step in my direction. "Mom, can I see your new place sometime?" The simple request made my throat tighten unexpectedly. "Of course, sweetheart. Anytime you want. Maybe this weekend?" She glanced over her shoulder, where Diana was watching our interaction with thinly veiled disapproval. I should probably get back. "This weekend would be perfect. Text me when you're free." As she walked back to her father and grandmother, her posture changed subtly, shoulders curving inward, head slightly bowed. The confident young woman, momentarily replaced by the compliant granddaughter Diana preferred. The transformation sent a wave of clarity through me, crystallizing the purpose behind everything I'd begun with that first call to Marcus. This wasn't just about protecting my assets or asserting independence after years of subtle erasure. It was about breaking a cycle that threatened to consume my daughter as it had consumed me, the gradual surrender of self to maintain Mitchell family approval. Later that evening, as I sat on my condo's balcony watching the sunset reflect off the river, Marcus called with an unexpected development. "Robert's attorney reached out about settlement discussions," he said without preamble. I blinked in surprise. "Already? We just had the preliminary hearing." It seems the judge's clear skepticism about their position on the coastal property has them reconsidering their strategy. They're particularly concerned about the documented attempt to sell it during your surgery. "What are they offering?" "Nothing concrete yet, just opening the conversation." Marcus paused. This could be a positive development, faster resolution, less emotional drain, but it could also be a tactical maneuver to gather information about our bottom lines. I considered this as I watched a boat glide silently along the river below. Or it could be Diana directing a strategic retreat to protect the Mitchell reputation. A messy public divorce wouldn't suit her image. "Very possible," Marcus agreed, "particularly with the evidence we have about Robert's financial manipulations. A judge might refer those for further investigation, which could impact his professional standing." The realization that we now held leverage, that the Mitchell family might actually fear the consequences of continuing this fight, sent a strange combination of satisfaction and weariness through me. After decades of subtle power imbalance, the scales had finally tipped. "How should we respond?" I asked. "I suggest cautious engagement. We'll agree to preliminary discussions while maintaining our core positions. Your business remains yours, the coastal property remains in trust, and your financial independence is non-negotiable." After we hung up, I sat with this new development, watching darkness settle over the city. The practical part of me recognized the advantages of a settlement: less emotional toll, faster resolution, reduced legal expenses. But another part hesitated, wondering if quick resolution would deny me the full public vindication that a trial might provide. My phone chimed with a text from Tyler. "Heard there might be settlement talks. How do you feel about that?" My son's increasing engagement in the situation touched me deeply. While he maintained appropriate boundaries, not taking sides in the conflict between his parents, his consistent check-ins demonstrated a maturity and empathy I hadn't fully appreciated before. "Considering all options," I replied. "How are things at the house?" "Tense. Grandma's been on the phone all evening. Dad locked himself in his office. I could picture it perfectly. Diana mobilizing her social network, Robert retreating into sullen isolation as his mother took control of the situation. It had been their pattern throughout my marriage, whenever something challenged Diana's carefully constructed family narrative. "Emma mentioned visiting this weekend," I texted back. She told me, "It's good. She needs space from the command center here." The characterization made me smile despite the circumstances. Command center indeed. Diana had likely converted the dining room into divorce strategy headquarters, just as she'd done for every family crisis over the years. "You're welcome anytime too," I reminded him. "I know. Finishing midterms first, then might take you up on that." The interaction left me feeling more centered than I had since the hearing. Whatever happened with settlement negotiations, my relationships with my children were evolving towards something healthier, more honest than before. The following morning brought a message from Dr. Bennett's office, reminding me of my 6-week post-surgical checkup scheduled for the next day. The timing felt symbolic somehow. Physical healing progressing alongside emotional and financial reclamation. When I arrived at Horizon later that morning, I found the office buzzing with unexpected energy. Denise met me at the door, barely containing her excitement. "Parker Development called," she announced without preamble. "They want to meet about their rebranding campaign. Apparently, they were impressed with our proactive approach to their market challenges." The targeted pitch we'd developed after losing the Westridge account had hit its mark. A significant potential client responding to our strategic pivot rather than Robert's behind-the-scenes manipulations. "When do they want to meet?" I asked, already mentally rearranging my schedule. "Tomorrow at 11. Their entire marketing team will be there." The timing conflicted with my medical appointment, a scheduling dilemma that would have sent me into a tailspin of guilt and accommodation just months earlier. Now I found myself considering options with clear-eyed pragmatism. "I have my 6-week surgical follow-up at 10, I explained. "I can't reschedule that after fighting so hard to establish my medical autonomy." Denise nodded, understanding. "We could push for afternoon, or I could lead the initial meeting with Jason." The old Olivia would have immediately sacrificed the medical appointment, prioritizing work above personal needs. The new Olivia recognized the importance of both. "Let's do this. I'll attend my appointment, then join the Parker meeting by 11:45. You and Jason start the presentation, and I'll arrive for the strategic discussion portion, which is my particular strength anyway." "Perfect," Denise agreed. "I'll update the team." The solution felt emblematic of my evolving approach to life, setting boundaries while maintaining commitments, delegating appropriately without abandoning responsibility. Small decisions building toward the balanced life I was reconstructing. As I settled into my office to prepare for the next day's meeting, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Diana Mitchell requesting meeting with me directly. Unusual development." I stared at the message, pulse quickening. Diana reaching out to my attorney directly, bypassing Robert and his legal team, was indeed unprecedented. Throughout my marriage, she had maintained the appearance of respecting traditional hierarchies while actually controlling events from behind the scenes. Direct intervention signaled that the preliminary hearing had unsettled her more than she'd shown. "Your thoughts?" I texted back. "Professional curiosity says meet. Strategic caution says decline." I considered the options carefully. Declining might maintain our advantageous position, forcing communication through proper legal channels. But meeting might reveal Diana's true concerns, potentially providing additional leverage. "If you meet, I want to be present," I decided. Anticipated that. She specifically requested meeting without you. Of course she had. Diana preferred to handle difficult conversations, her euphemism for manipulation attempts, without the subject present. It allowed her to shape narratives more effectively, to position herself as the reasonable mediator rather than the controlling architect of family decisions. "Then decline," I responded firmly. "All communication through proper channels." Marcus's response came quickly. "Already done." Robert's attorney called 5 minutes later requesting formal settlement conference, set for Thursday. The sequence confirmed my suspicion. Diana had attempted an end run around formal proceedings, likely hoping to leverage whatever personal influence she could with Marcus. When that failed, they immediately reverted to official channels. I spent the afternoon reviewing financial documentation with renewed focus, preparing for both the Parker presentation and the upcoming settlement conference. By evening, I felt confident in our position, though the emotional aspects of the situation continued to weigh on me. particularly Emma's tentative steps toward independence and what that might mean for her relationship with Diana. My 6-week checkup the following morning brought encouraging news. Dr. Bennett reviewed my latest scans with evident satisfaction. "The fusion is stabilizing beautifully," she noted, pointing to the images. "Your body is healing exceptionally well. I'm actually surprised given the circumstances." "The circumstances?" I asked. She glanced up from the scans. "Major life. Stress typically slows healing. Divorce proceedings qualify as significant stressors, yet you're ahead of the typical recovery curve." I considered this. Maybe because I'm addressing the actual source of stress rather than continuing to live with it. Dr. Bennett smiled slightly. "There's some research supporting that theory. Chronic stress can be more damaging than acute stress, particularly when it involves ongoing suppression of authentic responses." She made a notation in my chart. "Whatever the reason, I'm clearing you for increased activity. You can resume most normal functions, though I'd still avoid high-impact exercise for another month." As I left the medical building, I felt physically lighter, both from the positive prognosis and from Dr. Bennett's inadvertent validation of my life choices. My body was literally healing better because I had finally addressed the chronic stress of my marriage. I arrived at Horizon precisely at 11:40, giving myself 5 minutes to review the presentation progress before joining the Parker meeting. Denise met me outside the conference room, quietly updating me on the discussion so far. They're receptive, especially to our digital strategy. The CMO asked specifically about your approach to brand narrative evolution. I told them you'd address that when you joined us. I nodded, straightening my jacket and centering myself before entering the room. 6 people looked up as I walked. In Parker Development's entire marketing team, expressions ranging from curious to impressed. "Ms. Taylor," the CMO greeted me, standing. "Your team has been sharing some impressive concepts. We're particularly interested in your perspective on maintaining brand recognition while evolving visual identity." For the next hour, I led a focused discussion on strategic rebranding, drawing on case studies from our portfolio and addressing their specific market challenges. The conversation flowed naturally, the Parker team responding with increasing enthusiasm to our approach. What struck me most was how different this felt from client meetings when Robert had been peripherally involved. The subtle tension that had always accompanied his presence, his tendency to interject with references to Mitchell family connections, that invariably shifted attention from my professional expertise to his social capital. Today, there was none of that, just clear communication between professionals, mutual respect based on demonstrated competence rather than implied social status. When the meeting concluded with a tentative agreement to proceed with a formal proposal, the victory felt wholly mine. The walk back to my office was interrupted by an unexpected visitor, Diana Mitchell, standing near the reception desk, perfectly groomed as always in one of her designer suits, a small gift bag dangling from her manicured fingers. "Olivia," she greeted me, her voice carrying its usual blend of warmth and authority, the tone she used when orchestrating family events. "I was hoping to catch you between meetings." My first instinct was wariness. Diana never made spontaneous visits. Her appearances were always carefully timed for maximum impact. "Diana?" I acknowledged, maintaining professional courtesy despite my surprise. "I wasn't expecting you." "Clearly," she said, glancing around the office with what might have been genuine curiosity, she had visited Horizon exactly twice in the 15 years since I'd founded it. "You've built quite an operation here." The comment, delivered with something approaching genuine respect, momentarily threw me off balance. Diana rarely offered unqualified praise, particularly regarding my professional accomplishments. "Thank you," I said simply, deciding against adding anything further until her purpose became clear. She seemed to register my caution, her practiced smile softening slightly. "I thought perhaps we might talk privately, woman to woman, without all the..." She waved her hand dismissively. Legal entanglements. And there it was, the real purpose behind the unexpected visit. Diana was attempting exactly what she'd tried with Marcus, an off-the-record conversation, away from witnesses or documentation, where she could deploy the interpersonal tactics that had maintained her control for decades. "I appreciate you coming by," I said carefully, "but any discussions about the current situation should happen through our attorneys." Diana's expression hardened for a fraction of a second before resuming its pleasant mask. "I'm not here about the legal proceedings, Olivia. I'm here as a grandmother concerned about her grandchildren, particularly Emma." The mention of my daughter sent a flicker of alarm through me, though I kept my expression neutral. "What about Emma?" "She's confused, naturally, caught between parents, questioning family loyalties." Diana sighed dramatically. "She's at a critical age. College decisions, social connections that will shape her future. Stability is essential right now." I looked directly into Diana's eyes, seeing for the first time not the intimidating matriarch who had dominated my marriage, but simply a woman desperately trying to maintain control as it slipped through her fingers. "You're right about one thing, Diana," I said calmly. "Emma does need stability, but stability isn't the same as suppression. It isn't pretending problems don't exist to maintain appearances." Diana's perfectly composed expression flickered, with irritation. "I've only ever wanted what's best for this family." "For the Mitchell family," I corrected gently. "Not necessarily for me, or even for your grandchildren as individuals." She straightened, clutching her handbag tighter. "I've given you every advantage, Olivia. Introduced you to the right people, guided your social choices, even overlooked your modest background." A small laugh escaped me, surprising us both. "You've never overlooked my background, Diana. You've weaponized it at every opportunity." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. For 22 years, we had maintained the polite fiction that her criticisms were helpful guidance, her interference well-intentioned support. Naming the dynamic so plainly violated every unspoken rule of our relationship. "The settlement conference is tomorrow," I continued, my voice steady. "If you have concerns about Emma, they should be addressed there, with all parties and representatives present." I expected anger, perhaps a cutting remark delivered with her usual precision. Instead, something unexpected crossed Diana's face. A flash of uncertainty, quickly masked but unmistakable. "You've changed," she said finally, almost accusingly. "Yes," I agreed simply, "I have." That evening, as I prepared for the settlement conference that would determine the final shape of my post-marriage life, Emma arrived at my condo, hesitantly accepting my hug before wandering to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the river. "It's so different from our house," she observed, trailing her fingers along the sleek, minimal furniture. "Grandma would hate it." "Probably," I acknowledged with a small smile, "but I find I like it very much." Emma turned to me, her expression earnest. "Are you really going through with this? The divorce?" I joined her at the window, giving her the honest answer she deserved. "Yes. Some things can't be fixed once they're broken." "Because Dad tried to sell your property?" "That was the catalyst," I explained. "But the real reason is that I finally recognized a pattern that's been present our entire marriage. Your father and grandmother built a life that required me to become smaller, less authentic, less myself with every passing year." I touched her cheek gently. "I don't want that for you, Emma, or for Tyler, or for myself anymore." Something shifted in her expression, a recognition, perhaps, of patterns she'd absorbed without questioning. "Grandma says you're throwing away everything that matters for selfish reasons. What do you think matters, Emma? Really matters?" She thought for a long moment, looking out at the river flowing steadily below. Being true to yourself, I guess. Having people who see you for who you are. She glanced at me sideways. Dad never really saw you, did he? The insight, coming from my 18-year-old daughter, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. No, I admitted softly. I don't think he did. The settlement conference the next day proceeded with surprising efficiency. Whether from Diana's behind-the-scenes influence or Robert's growing recognition of his vulnerable position, their side came prepared to compromise. The coastal property remained in trust, protecting my family legacy. Horizon Marketing stayed solely under my control, while Robert retained his financial practice and the family home. Emma would split time between homes until college, with practical considerations like tuition and expenses equitably divided. When the mediator declared the major terms resolved, Diana rose abruptly and left the room, her rigid posture betraying her dissatisfaction despite achieving a settlement that avoided public scrutiny of her son's actions. Robert lingered after. The attorneys began preparing the formal agreement, approaching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I still don't understand why you're doing this," he said quietly. "We could have worked through this like reasonable people." I studied him, the man I'd spent over 2 decades with, recognizing both his genuine bewilderment and his fundamental inability to see beyond his own perspective. "That's exactly why this is necessary, Robert," I replied gently. "What you call reasonable has always meant me accommodating what you and your mother want. That's not a marriage. That's an erasure." 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day, I stood on my grandmother's coastal property, watching the waves crash against the rocky shore. The wind tugged at my hair, now styled in a shorter cut that suited me far better than the conservative style Diana had always preferred. Tyler and Emma flanked me, the 3 of us wrapped in warm jackets against the brisk ocean breeze. "What will you do with it now?" Tyler asked, gesturing to the undeveloped acreage stretching before us. "It's really beautiful, but it's just sitting here." I smiled, feeling the weight of my grandmother's journal in my pocket, her wisdom guiding me still. "I'm going to build a small retreat here, a place for creativity and renewal." Emma looked at me with curiosity. "For yourself?" "Partly," I acknowledged, "but also for others, women rebuilding their lives, finding their voices again after years of having them silenced." As my children and I walked the boundaries of my grandmother's legacy, now truly mine for the first time, I felt the final pieces of my reclaimed self sliding into place. The path forward wouldn't always be smooth. Diana would likely never fully accept my transformation from compliant daughter-in-law to independent woman. Robert would continue viewing our marriage's end as an incomprehensible betrayal rather than a necessary liberation. But here, with the endless horizon stretching before me and my children at my side, the future I was building felt infinitely more authentic than the life I'd left behind. My recovery was complete, not just from the surgery that had catalyzed this transformation, but from the decades of subtle diminishment that had preceded it. The estate plan I'd changed in those first days of clarity had protected more than my assets. It had protected my very self. And that was worth everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.